It is absolutely insane that when you spend $1,000 on the LEGO Star Wars Ultimate Collector Series Death Star, you do not get dual molded legs for any of the Imperial officers or even the best C-3PO with dual molded legs in the set. For $1,000, you don't even get the best of something that LEGO currently makes. And with the official unveiling of this set, there have been a couple of interviews that have been released where LEGO actually responds to the question and the criticism of why is there a lack of dual molded legs in a set that costs $1,000. There have been two interviews that I'm going to be referencing directly in this video, one from Brickset and one from David, Solid Brick Studios, and where they interview Mattie O'Neal, who is the graphic designer for the LEGO Star Wars Death Star, and he answers pretty much the reasoning as to why, and we're going to just kind of get into what he says in his response to this, and then I'll provide some additional commentary as well after and why it's just absolutely ridiculous. So we are first going to watch together the portion of David's interview where he's talking to Mattie about the minifigs and the dual molded legs, and it's pretty interesting the way Mattie kind of in this interview responds to the issue. He doesn't give a full-on answer, but then the Brickset interview as well we can add together and really get a clearer understanding of basically what he's trying to say without saying it.
I'm Mattie O'Neal. I'm a graphic design manager. I've been on the LEGO Star Wars team now my entire LEGO career, which is now 9.5 years. And I did all the characters, the stickers, and decorated elements in the UCS Death Star.
So the question on everybody's mind when it came to the minifigures was the lack of dual molded legs,
Yes.
like on C-3PO, but also the Imperial officers. You know, why was that decision made, especially on a $1,000 LEGO Star Wars set?
Sure. Yes. Even with a price point this size, we do have some restrictions to the amount of changes we can make to things like element colors, decorations, brand new elements. We get a certain amount of frames to do those things. And in this context, we were very focused on trying to get a lot of novelty into the characters. So every time we bring back a torso that we haven't had for a while or any decorated print that's new, that factors into that. Color changing wigs and making new elements. So we basically look at the set as a whole, try and see where we can get the most novelty, and generally these color changes, these frames go toward making more new characters. So in this case, like we just said, there's 38, so we really I'm really happy with the lineup that we got to make and some of the really fun new additions that we got to throw in there. So when you see like the overall lineup, just know that's where those resources were going.
Fair enough. Okay, so
All right, so right there from the interview, he definitely skirts around the issue. He mentions the number of frames and a restriction that they had when they were making the minifigs for the set, but he doesn't really give anything more than that. Just kind of mentions, oh, when we make new elements and things like that, that's where kind of the effort is going. And David doesn't press this any further in his interview, at least in what is live on his YouTube channel. The full interview will be linked in the description down below. But David doesn't really press on Mattie any further, where Brickset actually did a bit, and I want to read from their interview, which also will be linked in the description down below, because they kind of press on this issue a little further, and I feel like the answer that they get is a little bit better than the one David was actually able to get. Also, the Imperial officers do not include dual molded legs to represent boots as they sometimes have in the past. Why is that, especially in such an expensive set? The situation with any set we make, not just this one, is that we receive a certain allotment of frames to do different things with the elements, which can include new molds, color changes, and new decorations. We try to prioritize creating new characters over features like dual molded legs because making a new head, for instance, counts for more or less the same as changing the color of legs. We have to look at the whole set and decide on our priorities, so something like giving Galen Erso the printed symbol on his arm, as an example, was ultimately considered more important, and the molded boots did not make it in. I assume the same applies to C-3PO, but one of the problems I struggle with is that you already manufacture the minifigure with a dual molded leg, so why not drop the simpler version and just make that one? This happened with the Darth Vader receiving arm printing a few years ago, which then became standard. There are different factors with every set, but the same same actually happened with C-3PO and R2-D2 after the 75339 Death Star trash compactor diorama. We added printed arms to C-3PO and decoration on R2's back for the diorama, which became the norm going forward and still is today. Dual molding is a bit different though. Adding that cost to a figure that might need to appear in a much smaller and cheaper set like C-3PO is not necessarily an option. So in his case, we could not commit to the dual molded leg becoming the standard design. Having said that, we are aware it is something fans are passionate about and we try to include that minifigure whenever we can, but we have to prioritize. All right, there is a lot to unpack here, especially from the Brickset interview, and I appreciate them actually bringing up the fact that C-3PO is already manufactured. They already make one with dual molded legs, so why not include it? Now, basically the gist of both this interview and the one that David did, that Mattie really had to be careful in kind of the way he worded it, which I am very sympathetic to. Number one, I want to get that out here. This is not Mattie's fault in the lack of dual molded legs. He very clearly, without directly kind of says it, that he is restricted with what he is allowed to do. He has a limit on how many of these frames, as he calls it, that he can make for all of the minifigs. So given Galen Erso arm printing, for example, that takes away from potentially another minifig getting dual molded legs. That seems to really be what he's saying and how that system works. So with this reality, even the hat mold for the Imperial Dignitary, Mattie actually points to it during his interview with David, that would take up a frame. That's an element out of the allotment that he has to work with. So he does have to make the choice, okay, the Hot Tub Stormtrooper, that one we're gonna make sure gets dual molded legs, but then again, that's sacrificing another frame or element that I can use somewhere else. And to me, that is pretty ridiculous that the graphic designer is that restricted in what he can do. I can understand LEGO is a business, they need to make money. But the reality is, it's not like we are asking for arm printing on every single minifigure. It's not like we're asking for dual molded legs on every single minifigure. We're asking for a C-3PO that already is currently made, which we're going to get into a little bit more, and then Imperial officers just to get dual molded legs. It's the same piece that just would need to get put in the set a couple of times. It's not like we're making a ton of these new frames or elements. It's one existing one and then one other actually existing one that just needs to get thrown in. So I do get what he's saying and I'm sympathetic to him, and I'm not blaming him in this video at all for why we don't get these dual molded legs inexcusably in a $1,000 Death Star set. But LEGO clearly is restricting their design team far too much and really just trying to squeeze every cent out of what they are making in order just to be worried about. Like, LEGO is just purely showing that, at least very strongly in my opinion, this year, with the August 1st wave, with this Death Star, that they are just getting greedier and greedier and caring less and less about the fan base and doing right by their fans. Their slogan is only the best is good enough. Ryan says it all the time. Clearly that's not the case because they care more about getting every cent they can from a set and really restricting their designers rather than providing the best out of what should go down, what should be the greatest LEGO Star Wars set of all time, but clearly is far from it. It is absolutely insane, and I wish that there was a world where Mattie, for example, could be like, all right, here is my proposed minifig list. Here are all the frames I would like to do. Here are the things that, you know, the reasonings why I think we need to make them all this way. They all have dual molded legs, yada, yada, yada. And here is kind of what the proposed, I guess, budget for all of those frames or elements would be. Then LEGO, there might be some back and forth, then they come to an agreement on something. I feel like there should be a world where they can give us everything we got in this set, plus then getting dual molded legs and getting that same C-3PO that they already make. That should be an easy thing to come to an agreement on. That shouldn't be something where they just say no to. But to me, at least, it clearly seems like that's basically it. The powers that be above him restrict him a lot with what he can do with the minifigs. Here's your amount, here's what we're allotting you for the budget of this set, and you got to work with it and make the best of what you can. And I do understand at that point why we wouldn't get dual molded legs. It's not acceptable, but I can sympathize with kind of the position that he was at least put in from the people above him. That's where all the blame for this really does go, in my opinion, is the people who are making these allotments of frames, putting these restrictions and limits on a set like this. it's ridiculous. Now, I really do appreciate Brickset actually directly asking, you already make C-3PO with dual molded legs, why couldn't you just include him flat out in this set? And he kind of ignores that part of it, but he mentions the reasoning as to why they can't include dual molded legs, because it would make the minifig too expensive to include in a cheaper set. We just can't do that. We can't make C-3PO every single time with dual molded legs. And you know what? Fine. In a smaller set, a more affordable set, sure. If you're not getting the one with dual molded legs, fine. I think we all can live with that. But in a set that goes for $1,000, the fact that you can't do that, or at least he wasn't allowed to do that, I'm assuming, is again absolutely ridiculous. And he says that we are aware it is something fans are passionate about and we try and include that minifigure whenever we can, but we have to prioritize. Well, you easily could have, and you guys didn't. So I feel bad for Mattie because he's taken a lot of heat for this, but the flack LEGO needs to be made aware of. It's why I'm making a video like this, is I want to highlight this issue and bring to greater light out of these larger interviews, arguably what I personally think is the most disappointing part about this Death Star is that the minifigs couldn't be as good as we deserve, and LEGO wants to charge this much for this set. It is totally crazy. Now, within the Brickset interview as well, he does go into a little bit more detail as to where some more of these frames or elements did go with these new minifigs, as to kind of, it gives a little bit more understanding as to where the actual allotment, that restriction, whatever number he had, where all of that actually did go to. So the first question is, returning to the minifigure selection as a whole, an interesting feature of the Death Star is that it can and does have a lot of figures, but many characters have appeared before. So does that make the minifigure development harder than a set like the 75290 Mos Eisley Cantina, which has so many new characters? It is a different challenge, but an interesting one, and it gave us a chance to update several of the classic characters like Luke, Han, and Obi-Wan. It feels like they appear very frequently, but they were not in production when approaching this set, so there was a chance for fresh designs. I suppose that is a strange disadvantage of including these iconic characters, as I did not realize they had been updated for the Death Star, and others might think the same. True. There are a lot more new elements than are perhaps immediately apparent. Just running through all of the new minifigures fans may not expect: Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Grand Moff Tarkin, General Tag, Admiral Modi, Colonel Yularen, and the female Imperial Navy officer all have multiple new elements. In addition to the RA-7 droid, the Imperial dignitary and other fans will immediately recognize as new. Then the Imperial Royal Guards, the Imperial Shuttle Pilot, and Princess Leia feature new torso pieces. We also created several new heads for stormtroopers and all the other generic Imperial personnel to add to the selection we already use. So that's just a little bit more context as to the elements that he had as a limit, where those decisions were made. And I would kind of make a bit of an argument at this point that, okay, if you had the choice between giving C-3PO a dual molded leg in the set or a new stormtrooper face print, which you're never going to see anyway, or giving some of the Imperial officers dual molded legs over like a new stormtrooper face print, again, that you're never going to see, I think the fan base would have way rather have just stuck with the same stormtrooper faces that we have gotten for a while now, instead of getting a new one and then getting these Imperial officers with dual molded legs. So if that truly was the way that decision would have worked out, that these new stormtrooper faces might have cost getting dual molded legs, that's just my interpretation of this interview and his answer, then there, I think that is a very big flaw in the logic and the reasoning as to where these elements should go, in my opinion, and a little bit out of touch with the community in terms of what the vast majority, I think, would prefer and want. So that's just the kind of other part of this interview I thought that was worth mentioning, is that they do address, even with Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example, some new elements allotment that we had to go to his design to update him, which, fair enough. But other things, there definitely could have been, I think, a little bit of adjusting. But at the end of the day, there just shouldn't be a restriction to where with 38 minifigs, which is a large number, but I definitely don't think large enough for a $1,000 Death Star set, they should be able to just get away with making all of these minifigs as good as they possibly can, because we're not asking for the world here with what we wanted out of this set. We're asking for, I think, what is more than fair and justified for the price point. So let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments down below. Like I've said, both interviews will be linked in the description for you guys to watch and read in their entirety. But when I started reading the Brickset interview and then watching a bit of David's interview as well, I was like, all right, this is an issue that I think is very justified in the fan base having. And the fact that Mattie did kind of provide some insight as to the thought process and the reasoning as to why we didn't get dual molded legs is something I wanted to just highlight in its own video and make sure, you know, I try and do my part to spread it throughout the community. And then maybe LEGO can hear this backlash a little bit clearer if the community keeps letting them know that we do not agree with your decisions with something like this. You know, what the Death Star is as a cross-section diorama, that aside, the terrible gift with purchase aside as well, you know, the dual molded leg issue even in and of itself is just brutal. It sucks, in all honesty. It's really sad that we just couldn't get the best minifigs in the first $1,000 LEGO Star Wars set. You know, this set should have gone down and had the most care put into it so that it would just be a set that everyone was completely blown away by and went, yeah, $1,000. I get why LEGO was charging for this. They nailed every element of it. No detail was left unturned, as the design team likes to say they do, but it's just not the case. There was a lot left on the table. There was a lot of room to leave more value for your money, a lot more where the quality could have been better. And the minifigs not getting dual molded legs is an issue that I know a lot of us, myself included, are extremely passionate about, because it would have been so easy for them to have done. And I just do not believe that adding these dual molded legs would have cost that much to even really make a noticeable difference at all in the amount of profit LEGO would make for this Death Star. So I do think it's really ridiculous. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and a special shout out to Brickset and David for getting these interviews done and asking these questions. I do genuinely really appreciate, you know, them trying to get to a little bit to the bottom of this and bring up this, you know, very valid issue. And to Mattie as well, you know, for giving kind of the answer that I think he was most kind of allowed and able to. The answer he kind of had to give. I do sympathize and understand why he kind of worded it and said the way that he did, but that's why I'm kind of trying to, you know, read a little bit into it, make, you know, an opinion and an assessment on his response, and try, you know, make a little bit more sense of it in this video. As always, my name is Justin, and I'll see you guys on the next LEGO Star Wars video on Obi-Wan Studios.